I'm pleased to have today with me Dr. Jens Pindborg. Dr. Pindborg, your titles are so many that I'm going to take the opportunity just to let the viewing audience just hear a little bit about the post that you currently hold. Dr. Pindborg is a professor of oral pathology at the Royal Dental College in Copenhagen, as well as the head of the dental department at the University Hospital in Copenhagen, Denmark. And then I'd like to just read off a whole bunch of World Health Organization titles that you hold. Dr. Pindborg is director of the World Health Organization International Reference Center for Otogenic Tumors and Allied Lesions, of WHO's International Reference Center for Oral Precancerous Conditions, and the WHO Collaborative Center on Oral Manifestations of the Human Immunodeficiency Virus, as well as the head of the EEC Clearinghouse for Oral Problems related to the HIV infection, and holding editor-in-chiefs of different journals. Dr. Pindborg, how do you get so much done?
Well, I think that the key word or the key answer to that question is because I like it. And I think that if you like the work that you are doing, it certainly is no problem. I mean, you can always manage to get the time. Of course, there's another factor, or two more factors. First of all, I have a wonderful wife, and she understands that she is married to a guy who is a bit crazy and who is a workaholic. And secondly, that I have not been blessed with children, so therefore I can devote all my time, I can devote to what is my real interest. And of course my interest is, of course, besides the dental aspect, I have a number of other interests which we may discuss a little later. But I think that the secret, if you may say, the secret is because I just love my work. And I would like to quote one of my old American teachers, the late Dr. Joseph Weinman, whom I met first time in 1951 when I came to United States first time. And he said something which made an everlasting impression upon me. He said, "I'm the most happy man in the world because I get paid for doing my hobby." And I would like to make his words mine.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm sure people would wonder what went on before 1951 when you came to the States. You went to dental school in
Copenhagen. Yeah, and I was a lucky one in the sense that I was accepted in dental school in Copenhagen. At that time we had only one dental college in Denmark, and I was accepted as a dental student in 1940, and that was the last batch of those having only a 3-year dental education. It was changed in 41 to a 4-year dental education, and then a few years later it was changed to now we have a 5-year curriculum. But it has taken me a number of years to cope up with the lacking 2 years that I had and I was missing when I went to dental school. But when I went to dental school in Copenhagen, you should not forget that this was the wartime. We were 4 months before I was accepted for the dental school. We were occupied by the Germans on the 9th of April 1940. So all my life as a dental student, they were spent during the German occupation. And that lasted until the 4th of May, 1945. Then we were liberated by Montgomery's desert rats, which came up from Germany and liberated Denmark, which of course was one of the proudest days in our life. And during my time as a dental student, besides being interested in my dental curriculum, I also participated in the underground movement. And I was a distributor of all the illegal papers that we had in the school. So I had a little reservoir of illegal journals in my parents' home. And one day, the police was told that I was a suspicious man. So while I was standing up in the Department of Operative Dentistry, the Danish police came and arrested me. Well, I had got a warning the evening before because the underground movement had good connections within the Danish police, and this was 2 years before that the Danish police was captured by the Germans. So I knew in advance that I was going to be arrested, that I was going to have a search in my parents' home. So I got all the journals, I got them away, and they went home and saw that there was nothing of these illegal journals. So I was not kept for more than a few hours, and then I was a free man again. But we had, among several of the dental students, there were also some participating even more actively in the underground movement, and they were making sabotage and so on. But I was keeping mostly in touch with the illegal press, and the interest for the printed words has been one of my hobbies all throughout my life.
Well, tell me about these illegal journals. These were...
They were primitively printed on, they were cyclostyled, as we call it in old days. That was before we had the fax machines.
Oh, I see.
And
like
they were printed, yes, exactly. Yeah. They were mimeographed in basements, in deep secrecy. And there were, of course, among the Danish students, there were a very strong student movement against the Germans. And they had all secret contacts with people in the police and everywhere, so they knew what was going on, and we wrote all the things which could not be written in the official Danish newspapers because they were under German censorship. So we had an absolutely a press which was absolutely not free. So therefore there was a tremendous need and demand for the information. Of course, every evening at 7 o'clock, all our radios, we took the BBC. They had, of course, they had the newsreel to Denmark, and that was the way we, on the evening of 4th of May, I will never forget it, when the speaker from the BBC in London said that now the German forces in Denmark, in northern Germany, have surrendered to Montgomery.
Now, you started dental school in '40. Were the Germans already in Denmark at that time?
They had been in Germany. They had been in Denmark for 4 months when I began a dental study, and they remained there for 5 years.
Tell me about some of the decision-making that went on prior to going to dental school. What made you decide that dentistry was a career for you?
It's a good question, because I was split, as I have been for many years, between humanities and biology. And then I had a brilliant teacher in biology who influenced me very much. He later became a professor in zoology, and his teaching was marvelous, and I became very interested in biology. On the other hand, I also was deeply interested in literature. And one day I met the professor of literature at a meeting, and I asked him about the future for studying the comparative literature. So he said, unless you have a fortune of $100,000, I wouldn't advise you to do so. And at that time, my father's business was a little bit influenced by the war, so I said, better get to choose a profession where you can finish in a rather short period of time, so I wouldn't have to bother my parents for too long a time. So that was weighing very heavily in me deciding upon dentistry. And interestingly enough, now that is many years ago, that is, as a matter of fact, it's 47 years ago since I graduated. And if I was now having the student's entrance examination today, I would choose the same.
Do the same thing again?
I wouldn't change a bit of my career. Of course, I have made many foolish things in my life, and I would have liked to be without those. But the primary, my career, my dental career, I would certainly choose this again. It has given me a wonderful life, both from the national educational point of view and also from the international point of view. But I've always been connected with teaching. I have loved teaching from the very day I graduated. I was employed as a junior assistant in the Royal Dental College of Copenhagen 1 month after graduation, and I've been there since, advancing through the various grades.
Tell me a little bit about the humanities side of your interest. This is
my interest was primarily the history of literature, and so I realized that it would be easier for me to become a dentist and have this as a life job, and then have the history of literature as a hobby. And I've kept this, and I have been an ardent book collector. So now I have a library of 14,000 books. And this is something which is a part of my life. I love books, and there are not so many dental books anymore because I have donated all my dental books to the Royal Dental College. But I still keep all my first editions because I am a biblioman or a bibliophile, and therefore this has influenced my life. And again, thanks to a wife who is full of understanding, she has understood that books is an essential part of my life.
And lots of bookshelves.
Yes, I have a lot of bookshelves. I have books in 2 houses, but now I'm close to retirement, so I have to sell one of my houses, and I'm going to sell 4,000 or 5,000 of the books. And you know, it's difficult to separate from one friend. We have a Danish literary critic from he was primarily working in the end of the 19th century, and he said something about books which I think is a wonderful saying. He said, despite the fact that the books turn their backs against us, they are our best friends. And I think this is very wisely said, and they have been my very, very good friends over the years. But I've been interested not only in the history of literature, but especially in art. And that was the reason why I wrote a book on the dentist in art that was about 30 years ago, and now I'm working on a new edition of that book also, because arts appeal very much to me, and especially also how you portray the dentist and the dental profession in the art from way back from the 4th century before Christ. We have beautiful pictures of dentistry from that time.
I want to ask you more about that. I'm going to, in preparation for the interview, I usually do a literature search on the person that I'm interviewing, and did the literature search, and the one that I was using went back to 1970. There was 185 references in there that I went through. One struck me, and it just reminded me when you mentioned your interest in art, and that was about a dental motif on a Scythian vase.
On the Scythian vase.
Scythian vase.
Yeah, that's interesting because this was what I just mentioned, that in the peninsula of Crimea, they found in the middle of the 19th century, there was what we called it a mound, like a barrel, high, and there they was digging out a number of gold things, and a few years ago there was the whole treasure was exhibited in the New York Metropolitan Museum, and in my first edition of the book, which was way back in the early 50s, I had heard about the vase of gold, so I contacted the chairman of the Communist Party in Denmark, because the vase was in the Leningrad Museum in Soviet Russia. So that was the only way I could get a black and white picture. But then, about 7 or 8 years ago, when we had this exhibition in the Metropolitan, I could buy all the lantern slide in color of the vase. So now I have the beautiful collection of that vase. So this was interesting because there you see a man repairing a jaw fracture, because
on the vase.
On the vase, yeah, because the king of the Scythian kingdom, he didn't know who of his sons should be his successor. So they were asked to string a bow, and you know, when you string a bow and if rupture, so one gave a fracture of the leg and one a fracture of the jaw. So on the vase you see a repair of a fracture of the leg, and the other side is repairing a fracture of the jaw. So this is the first pictorial, I would say, demonstration of dentistry.
Now what year would that be?
400 years before Christ.
400 BC?
Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah, so it's quite a long time.
Yes. I'm interested, you mentioned about your father being in business. Was this in Copenhagen?
Yes, he had a small plan for mass reproduction of architects' drawings, and during the war there was a little standstill in building processes, but we survived in a middle-class surrounding, and he was just as crazy with book as I am, or I should say opposite. I inherited his love for books, and I also inherited his collection when he passed away 10 years ago. So I think there is some genes which determines some of your interest in life.
Where did the idea first come to you about dentistry? I know we talked about your interest in biology, and then of course...
The last year in high school, when I was again considering the options for a long study of medicine, which is 7 years, and a short study of dentistry, 3 years, and these two studies are similar in the way that in both of these studies you are in contact with human beings, and that was very important for me, to get in contact with human beings and to deal with treatment and so on. I didn't realize, however, that when I joined the Royal Dental College as a dental student, as a freshman in 40, I didn't realize that that would lead to around the world tours many times and visiting 70 countries in the world over the years. That I didn't realize, but that came afterwards.
Yes. So what happened then after dental school?
Yeah, then I had 1 year of military service. And it's interesting, came into the Navy because that was absolutely the most desirable position, because when you joined the Navy as a dentist, then you got a very nice uniform, a cadet uniform with a little dagger here, and that was of course very nice when you were going out with girls at that age. They would like to go out with a Navy man. And then when I came into the Navy and I started working there, then I realized that here was a gold mine for research. So I began immediately epidemiological studies of the gingival conditions in the newly conscripted Marine soldiers, or Navy soldiers. Marines is a different in the American connotation. But during the years, and then after 1 year I should go out of the Navy, but they thought that I should continue. So I was appointed head of the dental corps of the Royal Danish Navy, and there I remained from 46 to 58 when I became full professor in oral pathology. So every morning at 7 o'clock, from 7 to 9, I was in the naval base in conducting, directing the work of the dental clinic in the main base, and at the same time doing field studies around in Denmark, both in the naval bases and also in the army quarters. And finally we had collected about 10,000 people that examined, but it was not caries, it was only periodontal lesion. And I was especially interested in the acute necrotizing gingivitis, because during the war there were a few outbreaks of the epidemic of necrotizing gingivitis among the civil defense in Denmark. And then when Montgomery came with his desert rats passing the German-Danish border, he brought not only liberation with him, but he also brought necrotizing gingivitis. His soldiers were suffering from necrotizing gingivitis, and they infected the girls, and the girls infected the Danish boys. So I was sent out by the Department of Health, and that was in the late 45, in the early 46. And in some of these posts along the border, 20% of the Danish army soldiers had necrotizing gingivitis. Mind you, 20%. And this was because of the extremely poor hygiene in this area. And then I said, well, there must be some predisposing factors. So I started out to correlate with the consumption of cigarettes. And then came out a paper in the Journal of Dental Research in 47, and that was one of my first English papers in English, in which we demonstrated that the more you smoke, the more likely you are to get acute necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis. And it's funny that this is the paper of mine among 380 papers which is most often quoted. The one from 47, demonstrating that smoking has a significant role in the development of necrotizing gingivitis. And then I wrote a little book about it, and that must have been in 51 or so. And now there is a very interesting ending of this story. And now, 8 years ago, it came up again, because the necrotizing gingivitis is part and parcel of the HIV infection. So that is coming back to me again. So now I work on the necrotizing gingivitis. The cycle has been completed. You're right.
What began the kind of movement into oral pathology?
That's also an interesting question. I don't know whether I can really pinpoint any day or month, but when I was a dental student, I wrote my first paper as a senior dental student because I've always been very interested in endocrinology, and then I wrote an overview of the significance of the endocrine gland for dentistry, and that was solely a literature review. And then I said, well, there's some very interesting aspect, and the first experimental study I did was dealing with the female hormone estrogen, which has an important role upon the calcium metabolism. So I'm wondering whether the increased ossification that you can observe in long bone under the administration of estrogen, whether you could see them also in the dentine, in the continuously growing incisor of the rat. Well, we didn't succeed in that. We only found changes in the long bone, but it was my introduction into experimental oral pathology. And then I became completely captivated by this. And I was reading vividly the literature. I began studies on the experimental fluorosis, the experimental cadmium intoxication, because there was a paper, I read a paper very early in the 40s by two people. One was Jin, and the other one is a very well-known dentist, Volker, who later became president of the Alabama University. They wrote a paper in the early 40s which influenced really my research, because they mentioned the bleaching or the depigmentation of incisor teeth under the influence of both fluoride intoxication and cadmium intoxication. So I said, better let us go deep into this. Let us try to study this from the histological point of view, and that became my PhD thesis.
And you did your PhD in Denmark?
Yes, and then during the work with the rat, I came across a name which I'm sure, although you are much younger than I am, that you will remember, and that is Isaac Schauer, who was at that time dean of the School of Dentistry at the University of Illinois. And I wrote to him, and I have written all his wonderful papers on the rat incisor. He was really the master in using the rat incisor. I got some very nice reply, and then he suggested that I should apply for a postdoctorate fellowship from the National Institute of Dental Research, which was newly founded, and that was in 50 I applied, and in 51 I got the grant, which was $250 a month.
That was
it. That was it. And then my wife and I moved to Chicago and spent 9 wonderful months in the department of Isaac Schauer, and there were 2 other giants. There were Joseph Weinman, the bone pathologist, and Harry Sicher, I'm sure you remember, the famous anatomist. And that was a fantastic opportunity for a young scientist. I came there, and I was 30 years of age, and one day I remember I gave my first paper on an experimental study on vitamin E to Isaac Schauer. I said, it's fine, but show it to Dr. Weinman and Dr. Sicher. So they read it and said to me, come in the afternoon. So I was sitting there between these 2 giants. I mean, they were small people, but mentally they were giants. And then Sicher said to Weinman, Joe, read aloud the first sentence of his paper. And Weinman read aloud the first sentence. No good, Sicher said. And that continued. And finally, he had rewritten the entire paper. It went out to the secretary. Now, after 1 week, we started the whole thing over again. And that was really a lesson which taught me a tremendous amount of how to write a paper. So you see that I was really privileged during this 9 months in Chicago to be in this wonderful place, meeting these outstanding fellows. And of course, I also had the chance to meet Orban, who had a practice in Perio at that time in Chicago. So I am forever grateful to my American alma mater, the University of Illinois.
This was the first time you came to the States?
Yeah.
What was it like seeing the United States after all those years?
It was wonderful. It was wonderful. And you know, I came over with a student flight, a cheap student flight. So we flew from Copenhagen to Ireland, and then jumped to Iceland. It was with these DC-4, and jumped over to Newfoundland, jumped to New York, and then we flew with these. The TWA had this special plane, I can't remember, with a big tail, and we flew to San Francisco. And there I met Herman Bex. And there I spent 2 weeks in his place before I went to Chicago. And Herman Bex was also really a man who had did a lot of work with experimental pathology. So he also greatly influenced my work and was extremely kind. And as a matter of fact, he was the first who offered me a job in America. And up to this day, I think, well, did you do the proper thing to refuse the kind offer here? My life would have been different. But on the other hand, I have been back to the United States 100 times or so, so I still maintain that I made the proper decision. But I enjoyed being in the States, and the reason, I think, was that, and my wife and I got married here because she had taken out papers, so she could have a job, so she could support the family a little bit. But what impressed us was the openness of the American people, that you are always welcome in the laboratories. There are no secrets, and the hospitality that we received was absolutely enormous. These young people coming here from a poor country this time and were received with open arms. That was wonderful. So I have always kept a very great love for the United States. And now the circle again. I began as a postdoctorate fellow of the National Institute of Dental Research, and now I'm a visiting scientist of the same institution.
Right. You also mentioned that through the years you've also met all of the directors of NIDR.
Yeah, when I got my postdoctoral fellowship, that I have to add to the story that after I finished 9 months in Chicago, I went 3 months to Washington. And I shared them with working with Colonel Bernier, that you also know, General Bernier, and then with Captain English. I don't know whether you remember him, but he was director of the dental research outfit of the Naval Medical Research Institute out in Bethesda. And he was extremely kind to me, and later he became the Naval Science Attaché in London, and I did something for him to be acquainted with Scandinavian research. And there, during these 3 months, I met Trent Dean, which of course was a tremendous experience to meet this this giant, the man, I think one of the few dentists who was ever suggested for the Nobel Prize for his fluoride studies. And then, of course, I met his successor, Dr. Pogge Arnold, and after him came Creshover, and then after him came Dave Scott, and then came Dr. Harold Lø. So, and the vice director in the last 2 years was one of my students, Dr. Marie Nylén. She became the director of the extramural grants. So it was nice to see my old dental student in this very high position. So again, I've kept an extremely close contact. And now in recent years, of course, my interest in the diseases of the oral mucosa, which really began in 1953, that had got a renewed interest by a collaboration with Dr. Dushanka Kleinman in the epidemiology branch of the NIDR, and also my old friendship with Dr. Harold Lø, that it has enabled me to, again, to go into a very fruitful collaboration, and not to forget, of course, the tragic aspect of the HIV infection.
I know a lot of your work now that relates to HIV is with the World Health Organization. I wonder if you could, how did that connection begin?
That is very interesting. As I told you a little earlier when we had the discussion, I was from the very early beginning a very good friend of Dr. David Barnes, and he has always understood that I was interested in these matters of the oral mucosa and has supported me in many ways. And then when I realized that there was something in the mouth, and that was, I saw my first AIDS patient in '82, I said, well, to myself, here's something which ought to be studied further. So I wrote a suggestion that we should, the WHO should establish a collaborative center on the all problems related to the HIV infection. And as you know, bureaucracy works a little slowly. And finally, they decided upon to have this international or collaborative center in Copenhagen. And there we have been producing a tremendous amount of teaching material. And again, we began working very closely with, of course, the National Institute of Dental Research. And you know also we had contact with the Veterans Administration in training some of these people, also with the Centers of Disease Control, the ADA, and with the Fédération Dentaire Internationale. So this, coupled with the All Health Unit, has made a very good integration in all the efforts of trying to fight this evil. And I mean fight. Of course, we can do very little in the treatment of these people from the systemic point of view, but we can contribute very much in making an early diagnosis of the infection and also treat effectively all these many oral lesions which are characteristic for the HIV infection.
I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that. Dr. Pindborg, when you say we, you mean the dental profession.
Yes.
Tell me more about what you envision as the dental profession's role in the diagnosis and the care of the HIV patient.
I think that the dental profession has a tremendous important role, and it is becoming more and more important in the sense that as long as we get new type of treatments, it means that you will have a better outcome of the treatment if you start the treatment at an early stage, meaning that the early diagnosis become very, very important. And as we know that about 25% or so of the HIV-infected patients will have all manifestation as one of the very early signs of the disease. It
25%?
Between 20 and 25%, we estimate. We have no proof so far. And we know, of course, that AIDS patients will have candidiasis, fungal disease in the mouth in 90%. But as a first sign of the disease, around 20-25%, this is my qualified guess. And then it is up to the dentist to be able to make this diagnosis. And therefore, there's only one word which should characterize the dental profession, and that is an eagerness to pursue continuing education. And I've been very gratified seeing that in many places all over the world that the dental profession is aware of its responsibility. And I can just give you an example that last year I gave 180 lectures on the HIV infection in 23 countries around the world. So there is a very great interest in this. And I think also that we have to teach a number of countries where they don't have so much AIDS now, but where they are going to get the disease. The disease will be with us for a great number of years. But the dental profession has not only a role to play in the early diagnosis, also in the treatment of especially the fungal infections and also the periodontal lesions. As I intimated a few minutes ago, that there are very characteristic periodontal manifestations of the HIV infection. And there, of course, the dental profession is particularly well suited to deal with the treatment of periodontal lesions. So therefore, this is the second role. And the third role is that the dental profession should not be afraid of providing routine dental care to HIV-infected people. In the beginning of the epidemic, there was a lot of hysteria in your country, in my country, in many countries. Dentists didn't want to treat these infected people, which we know today is ridiculous because there is no risk. If you just follow what you are being taught in the dental school, if you follow the regulation and all the prescriptions which are being put out by the national dental associations. And we have been it has been gratifying to see the development that the resistance among the dentists, and it also applies to United States and in Denmark, that there is very few problems nowadays. People understand that there's no risk if you take the precautions. So so the dental profession has really three different jobs to perform within the dealing with the HIV-infected patients.
What's been the response of the medical profession to the role of the dentist in your traveling around? Has there been an appreciation of that?
In some quarters, yes. Especially we have good relations in, I can speak mostly, of course, of Scandinavian countries, where there is absolutely a good collaboration between the dental and the medical profession. I also know that in the United States, because there you were one of the pioneering countries in providing hospital dental care, but it has been a problem, for instance, in the United Kingdom. And 2 years ago, we had an EEC-sponsored meeting in Sheffield with the purpose of trying to bring the medical and dental profession together. And I always say, when I'm lecturing about this subject, I always emphasize that every HIV-infected patient should and must be examined by an MD, of course, and also by a dentist who is especially qualified in oral medicine. And that is absolutely a must. And we know that there are countries where you have a lack of collaboration. So the only thing between medicine and dentistry, so I think we have only one way to go, and there I think that you have a beautiful example in this country with the school and the group in San Francisco with the Greenspans and their collaborators. They have been a very good example for many, many centers in the world, in the way that they have been dealing with the medical people also, and have done absolutely outstanding research. I think we should never forget that the recognition of the hair leukoplakia was made by dentists, and that was the Greenspan group and Dr. Saul Silverman in San Francisco. So there's no doubt that the scientists in the United States has done a pioneering effort. On the other hand, to be very frank with you, I have been a little bit surprised that if you have had the infection for 8 years, that, for instance, in New York, they had not really opened their eyes only lately for the gold mine of material that they have had. They have utilized it much more intensely in the center out in San Francisco. But it's coming up now, and you can see that with all these annual AIDS conferences, there are now coming up very many good contributions from many countries in the world.
When you began to talk about oral medicine, I know you have an interest in the future of dentistry, and I wonder if you might want to share some of your views about where the profession is heading and what you see as its future.
I think that this is a question which is very much also of interest for the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization, the WHO, has already had 2 meetings discussing the content of the future curriculum, and there's no doubt that the idea of WHO is in the future not to speak about dentists, but to speak about an oral physician. So the study will and must be oriented more in the direction of the medical aspect. Now we have learned how to conquer, to reduce caries, also to some extent periodontal diseases. So we will see in the years to come a more, I think, a more comprehensive concept of oral medicine. Also interest for the temporomandibular joints, the salivary glands, the jaws, and the saliva. And you will see that within these areas I just mentioned, a lot of very outstanding research has been done here in many countries now. So there's no doubt that the orientation in the future will be towards the more broadly medically minded. But still I maintain that we should keep dentistry apart from medicine, in the sense that I don't subscribe to the idea that they have in Austria, in Italy, in Spain, that you should first be an MD, and after that you can get 2 more years and then you are a DDS. I like to have the 5-year curriculum, which I think is suitable for a good and extensive education of a dental student.
And keep it separate.
Keep it separate, but very close collaboration. Now we are in Copenhagen now making an experiment which will be active from '91. We are merging 3 lines. We are merging medicine, dentistry, and human biology into one health sciences faculty. but we will maintain, of course, the 5-year curriculum and everything, but we will have it in several fields. We will have or share the teaching staff with the medical, which gives some saving also.
And sensitize them to the dentistry.
Sure, that's also very important. And let them to respect that dentistry is just more than filling teeth. That, of course, is also very, very important. Now, speaking about filling teeth, there's an interesting observation I have been doing recently, because I'm consultant for the NIHR Walter Reed project on the HIV. And when I compare the Danish patients with the American patients, I must say that the dentists in America are making a beautiful technical job. I think they polish their amalgam filling a little bit better than we do in Denmark. And my Danish colleagues don't like it when I say it, but this is my conviction, that you are doing the beautiful technical work also.
You've taken some pictures?
No, not yet, but I'm going to take.
I don't want to let the opportunity pass when you talked about your long friendship with David Barnes, if you could maybe tell a little bit about how you met him.
Yeah, that was interesting, because I had got a grant from the WHO to study precancer, all precancer among the natives of Papua New Guinea. And I came out there, and before I left the headquarters where I was briefed in Geneva, the boss at that time was Dr. Mario Chaves from Brazil, and he said to me, I've heard about there's a promising young man and very interested in public dental health in Papua New Guinea. Couldn't you look into this, whether he would be something of use for WHO? So I came out and I met Dr. Barnes, and he and I immediately, we got very well together, because both of us are singing in male choirs. So therefore we had a lot of mutual interest. So we really worked very well together. So after 1 week I cabled home to WHO, sent him the ticket, and then that became the very happy marriage between Dr. Barnes and WHO. And I'm very happy having been a little bit of instrumental in getting this wonderful guy to work for WHO.
And finding him in New Guinea.
Yes, but there was a little story to this New Guinea which is quite interesting. And I was up in the highlands, and I was examining for these precancerous lesions, and I was taking biopsies. And you know, these people, they were naked, and they had spears and bows, and they were standing around, and there was no European. I had a native interpreter, and I was taking biopsies. The blood was coming out, and these people came closer and closer and closer. So I said to the interpreter, what on earth is going on? Are they going to kill me? Oh no, they also want to have a biopsy. So it was a paradise for an oral pathologist.
I don't know if people had missed it, but when you mentioned about your singing, I noticed. Now I'm reading here from a list of just incredible numbers of chairmanships of. As an example, chairman of the FDI subgroup on epidemiology of oral tumors, founding member of the International Academy of Oral Pathology. But then stuck in between here is the president of the Copenhagen University Glee Club.
Yeah, I've always been interested in music. And when I graduated from high school, the same year I went into the dental school, I became member of the University Glee Club. And this has been a place where I've got my best friends. And now this year, I have been singing there for 100 semesters. And you know, the academic year in Denmark is divided into two. We have 2 semesters per year. So I am now the 100th semester year singer, and that is always celebrated. So I have been active singer, and I was chairman for a couple of years, many years ago, for the Glee Club, and I've arranged trips to France and other parts of the world for the Glee Club.
So this is an all-male?
All-male, and we are the oldest male choir in Scandinavia. We are just this year we celebrated our 150 years anniversary.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
For a male choir, yeah. So when I was in Illinois, I participated every Wednesday. There was a choir exercise at lunchtime, so I participated in, you know, singing American songs. So this has been music has been a substantial part of my life also.
Well, there was one other interesting thing. As long as right next to the president of the Copenhagen University Glee Club, you also have down that you were president of the Danish Israel Society, 64 to 69.
Yeah, this has also a special background, because when I was in Illinois as a visiting professor in '58, Dr. Weinmann, who was my very dear friend and mentor, he became ill, and he had a cancer. And before he passed away, he had received an invitation to be a visiting professor in Israel in oral pathology, but he couldn't go because of his tumor. So he suggested to the Israeli that they should invite me instead. So they invited me in 1960, and I came to the Hadassah Medical School and the dental faculty, which was rather newly established. And there I worked for 2 months and gave 60 lectures in 2 months. So I really worked hard, but it was a wonderful time in my life, and I became really an ardent Zionist here, and respecting the Israeli for their pioneering spirit. So I got a number of friends, and I've been back 7 times. And then when I came back, I gave a number of lectures about Israel. And then they elected me chairman of the Friendship Society for, I was 6 years I was there. And that belongs to some of my very great memories when I met Ben Gurion, Golda Meir, Shimon Peres. So I have had the pleasure of meeting all these outstanding people and having entertained them. Also Teddy Kollek, by the way.
How did you get to meet all these folks?
Because we invited them as speakers in our society. So when they came to Copenhagen, we were hosts for these people, and that gave me a chance. And I think the most impressive of all these people was Golda Meir. I will never forget, she was standing in the big lecture room of the university, the main hall, which was absolutely full to capacity, more than that. And she kept the audience completely spellbound for 2 hours, without having one single piece of paper and note. She just spoke for 2 hours. This was fantastic. I will never, never forget it. So that's a privilege of having had such kind of activities besides. Now, of course, it's becoming a little bit difficult to be a friend of Israel with the present development here, but I still maintain close contacts. But I also, by the way, I also lecture in a number of the Muslim countries, and I have just recently been in Kuwait and established some very, very cordial relationship with the dentist there. So again, I don't like that politics and religion should play a role in my lecture activities. I accept to go everywhere in lecturing, especially about AIDS, because this is something which affects all of us. I remember that 2 years ago I was lecturing in Moscow, and that was very interesting. It was in the School of Stomatology, and there were 500 people sitting. And I don't know whether you know the Russians, the dental surgeons, they have like cook hats, white hats on, and you looked over this room here, and I gave 3 or 4 hours lectures. And then the interpreter, who was director, he said, well, to most of the people out, and then I had to give a special lecture for the professors. So that was really very interesting.
Let's take a little break now.
Yeah.
And give us a chance to sit a little bit, and then we'll continue again. Dr. Pindborg, I wonder if we could sort of go back to some of your early days. I'm interested in hearing what it was like growing up in Copenhagen.
Well,
what was Pindborg like as a boy?
Well, I was a real boy in the sense that I was a great lover of sport, and I played football. So every evening I was out. We were on the football court. I lived in, as I said earlier, in a solid environment of a middle class. We had a 4-room apartment in a nice house, big house, a single house, but we had an apartment building. And I had 2 wonderful parents, and I also had a sister, and we lived a very happy family life. But every evening and sometimes afternoon I took off, and just across for our house there was a big park, similar to Central Park in New York. And there we were playing football.
Soccer.
Soccer, that's right. Absolutely soccer. And I was playing on the team of my school. And then eventually, in the age of 15, 16, I turned my interest to tennis. And then I played tennis, and I've ever played tennis ever since. And now I play 2 times a week. I have a double in the afternoon with 3 dentists, and they are all beyond 70, so I'm the youngest, 68 years of age, and we play every Monday for 4 to 5. I have a wonderful time together. And then I'm playing with a young female dentist. She's 40 years of age, and we play from 7 to 8 in the morning. And there, you know, you really try to do something. You don't want to be beaten by a girl. So that is part of my life and part of the exercise, because you must have some kind of exercise. When you are sitting so much at the writing desk, so much sitting behind a microscope, you must do something. But I also like to walk when we are in visiting cities. There I walk. But Copenhagen at that time, in the early 40s, was a quiet, nice city, and we had a lot of green spots around the city, and it was a very pleasant town to live in, not too provincial. So I can only say that I had a very happy youth in Copenhagen. So afterwards I've had a chance to compare with a number of other cities, but I like Copenhagen, although it's now become terribly expensive to live in Copenhagen. And of course it was a charm that the dental school was very close. It was just 5 minutes walking from where I lived. Oh, wow. So I could go to the dental school. Now we have moved a little further. So that was also very practical.
When you think back on those boyhood days, is there anything that stands out in terms of things that's influenced either your career or your life in some way?
Yes. I had some very good friends who were 3 years older than I was, and they influenced me greatly in the choice of literature. And they really taught me to evaluate. For instance, Henrik Ibsen was something which I got from an influence from these older boys, and also the story of culture by Egon Friedel, the Austrian author who later committed suicide. I read his book when I was 16, 17 years old. So I had a heavy spiritual influence from very, very good boy friends. So that is something which I remember very, very strongly from these years. And then I also had the privilege to attend the same school, which was just 10, 15 minutes by bicycle, for 12 years. So I began in 7, and when I left the university graduation exam 12 years later in exactly the same school. This is also a privilege to have the same wonderful teachers and so on.
And then, of course, you had all those girls who were interested in your Navy uniform.
Yeah, but that was later. That was after I graduated. Yeah, that's right.
I'm still impressed with all of the things that you get done. Even more impressed now that I hear about some of the other things you're doing. One piece of it that you've not talked about is your editorships of the journals.
Yeah, that is an important aspect of my life. And it always began very early, because in December 1940, I decided, together with 2 of my fellow dental students, to establish a dental journal for dental students in Copenhagen. So we raised some funds, and we established a journal, And we gave it the name in Latin called Dens Sapiens, meaning the wisdom tooth in Latin. And I edited this while I was a dental student, 2 or 3 years, and now it has appeared regularly. So now it has 50 years anniversary, the journal. So I wrote the other day, I wrote a letter to the journal, which has become very primitive now. So I said, well, this is a voice from the grave. And I wrote and wanted to say that when we edited the journal in the early 40s, we also had a little bit of a scientific content. And then the journal went through some years of, here, 7, 8 years again after the student revolution, a very great deal of negative contribution. But now it's coming up again. But I would like to see a more professional aspect of the journal. But this started my career as an editor. And then I became an assistant editor of the Danish Dental Journal, and that is 30 years ago. And because I was starting writing for the journal, and I began, which I think that many young scientists really should do, they should write abstracts. Because this is a way in which you learn a certain paper when you try to make an abstract from it. And furthermore, you render a service to the dental profession. And this is one of my favorite themes when we have the General Assembly of the Danish Dental Association, and also in the faculty meeting in the school, that I urge the young scientists to write the abstracts, because I think that we get paid for doing what we like in life. I mean, very few people get salary for doing exactly what they like. So we have a moral obligation of informing our colleagues. And the only way we can inform our colleagues, of course, is in colleges, in courses, and also writing in our local journal. So then I became editor-in-chief later on, and 3 years ago I celebrated my 25 years anniversary as editor-in-chief of the journal.
This is the Danish Dental Journal.
Danish Dental Journal. And now 10 years ago we changed completely the face, and now we have lots of color pictures and so on. So we think we are producing a readable journal for the dental profession. I have a co-editor who takes care of all the administration, because I know nothing about money, but I take care of all the scientific evaluation of the papers coming in. So, but you see, there is a difference between a dental journal and a medical journal. Because a medical journal, for instance in Denmark, can derive their material from 50 hospitals in Denmark, but we only have 2 dental schools in Denmark. So therefore it's sometimes difficult to get enough stuff of scientific merit. But we are publishing 20 issues a year of the journal.
Yeah, 20 issues a year?
20 issues a year. And each one of them is 60 pages. But then I became, very early, I became interested in writing. So I wrote my first textbook in 1948 in the international Danish publisher called Mosgard. And they led me to a very lifelong collaboration here for 42 years with the publisher. And the first challenge I got was 20 years ago with the Scandinavian chapter of the IADR, called the Scandinavian Dental Society, and they have a journal, and it's called Scandinavian Journal of Dental Research, which now goes into its 98th year. So I hope to. I've been editor there for 20 years, so I hope I have 2 more years so I can celebrate the 100th years anniversary of the Scandinavian Journal of Dental Research, which is an interesting journal in the sense that we only bring papers written by Scandinavians, or by Scandinavians working in foreign laboratories, or by foreign guest workers in Scandinavian laboratories. So the members are paying for the journals themselves, but we have a very good access of papers, and we have 8 months waiting time. But that has been a tremendous attractive job to do this, because you have, again, as editor, a chance, like you have to when you edit the Danish Dental Journal, you have a chance and a possibility to educate your profession. You really can choose, especially in the Danish language journal, but I have always maintained quality. The only way in which you can maintain quality in an international journal is by means of referee. And I think that all referees in the world, they deserve the highest prize because they do a job without any kind of remuneration, free of charge.
Yes,
and they do,
yeah.
that is fantastic. And you could not edit really a journal of high quality without this service. I have referees from almost all over the world. I have referees, and I have only 2 times in my life have met a refusal of the 2 persons did not want to assist in making a evaluation of a paper. So the Scandinavian Journal of Research is the face of Scandinavian dentistry to the world. We also have another one which is called Acta Odontologica Scandinavica, which is edited by Ivar Mjør, you know, the Norwegian professor. And he and I are very good colleagues, and we never feel any competition. We never inform the other whether a paper has been refused. The people should have the benefit of the doubt. And we can fill these 2 journals with 6 issues a year each. We can fill them with good, valuable Scandinavian research.
Well, that's wonderful.
And then came that's now 14, 15 years ago, the International Association for All Surgeons, they wanted to establish a journal. And the Secretary General was a Dane, so he suggested Monsgaard should be the publisher. And then they asked me to edit the journal. So I edited for 5 years. I was editing the International Journal of All Surgery because I was a surgeon in my youth. And then it was taken over by some other people. But now it has got its name changed to International Journal of All and Maxillofacial Surgery. Again, an indication of expansion of dentistry. And then there came a man to Monsgaard, and that is 18 years ago. And he said to Monsgaard he wanted to make a journal in community dentistry, in preventive dentistry. But he made so exorbitant demands that he wanted to have Monsgaard to pay for an office and secretary and whatnot. So Monsgaard couldn't meet his demands. So they asked me whether I would start the journal. So I edited the community dentistry and all epidemiology for 17 years. And that was fascinating because I had never really been interested in the community dentistry, but I became in that because I've always been interested in epidemiology. Yes. So I had a number of people working and also a number of Americans working on the editorial board. Yes. And then 2 years ago, Dr. Harold Fulmer, who was the editor of another of Monsgaard's journal, Journal of All Pathology, he resigned. And then I said to Monsgaard that I would like to quit community dentistry, which is not so close to my heart as all pathology and all medicine. So if they would give me the editorship of that, I will leave community. So they said, okay, you take over. So last year, 89, I edited, and I hope to get 3 or 4 more years, and edit and then I changed the name to the Journal of All Pathology and Medicine. So now we have another, besides the OOO, which of course is the old prestigious journal, we now have the Journal for All Pathology and Medicine, and we get a worldwide, I would say, influx of papers. So this is, in short, my editorial life.
And not so short.
And I like it, and I like it. I think it's very, very interesting, and I could do it in the plane. You know, I'm always doing editing in the plane.
I just want to ask you about something related to the publishing that I came across, and of course I couldn't read the article. It was in the Scandinavian Journal of Dental Research, but you wrote an article called "The Ethics of Publishing Results from Research," and I was wondering what that was about.
Yeah, that was about the question of the Helsinki Declaration. You know, the Helsinki Declaration is nothing to do with politics. You know, there's a Helsinki Declaration of Human Rights, but there's another Helsinki Declaration for Medicine, saying that you should have the informed consent, and that there are certain rules you have to observe before you begin on an experiment. It has to pass through a local, a national ethical committee. And my problem was whether all these papers, which are now submitted to journals, have they all been through an ethical committee. So therefore we are now expecting people to write, if it's an experimental study, this study was approved by the national committee of ethics, or medical ethics. Because we know that in old days, and that's a little bit cynically said, that what we have learned most from are the most unethical experiments. And let me give you an example, and it's always easy to criticize in retrospect. But I don't know whether you ever heard of a study which was carried out in the 40s in Sweden called the Vipeholm. The Vipeholm study was a study in which they used insane people and they fed them with caramels and high carbohydrates, so they got a lot of caries. Now today it would be considered the most unethical experiment, but at that time nobody objected to this. But it is to show that time has changed our attitude to ethics. And I have for 2 years been member of the Danish government ethical council, where we have been dealing with all these problems of ethics in medicine. And that is a very, very interesting question. And I think in the United States you have introduced this also quite early, these very, very heavy requirements of high ethics in carrying out biomedical research. And I think that again, that the reason why I wrote this one was I took as a few examples some studies which in the past were accepted. Also some of the studies where you didn't brush your teeth but let have plaque accumulated and you got gingivitis, now that you couldn't do today. But the worst was the Vipeholm study. But now Sweden has introduced laws who are much more, they're much more stringent than the one that we have in Denmark. So I think that in most countries in the world, I think there is now a growing understanding of the ethical background for human experiments.
I know you've been involved with medical research in Denmark. Could you tell a little bit about what that involvement was? Yeah,
almost every country has a medical research council which has a special government grant, and this is being distributed. And we have had a medical research council in Denmark for the last 25 years. And it has 15 members, and they are chosen by each of the 3 universities. And one is chosen from the School of Pharmacy, one is chosen from the College of Dentistry, and then the rest are chosen by the Minister of Education.
And the function of the council
is to allocate money. We have, or the council had about 1,000 applications a year. And then every third Thursday, the council meets for a whole day meeting, and 2 times a year they meet for 3 days meeting when they have to, for instance, deal with 400 applications in one session. And there you have the highest number of money available for medical research in Denmark is administered by the Medical Research Council. So dentistry has one voice in the whole game.
Out of the 15.
Yeah. But these 8 years, and I had first 5 years, and this was because RL went to United States, and he was member, but his place was open. So I was elected for his remaining 3 years, no, 5 years was it. And then I was elected chairman the last year.
So you became chairman then?
Yeah. And then I went out for 3 more years, and then they changed the rules so I could go in and get 3 more years. So the total number of years you can be are 8 years. So I got in again and was elected chairman for 2 more years. And as I always say, these years in the Medical Research Council have been the best years in my life, because you met 15 people, more or less from the outside, prima donnas, but working in the most harmonious way. In the 3 years I was chairman, we had not one single vote on any matter. So everything was consensus. So it taught me a lesson about how wonderful a collaboration you may have between people who politically are out on the absolutely left and the right, and have an absolutely perfect integration when it comes to evaluation, what is quality in science. Yes. So I have been extremely happy in having had this chance to work with the medical profession, and also again exposing dentistry. The dentistry is, or should be considered on par with pharmacy and medicine. So therefore it is the Council for Medicine, Dentistry and Pharmacy.
That must have been a neat experience. But
it was a wonderful experience, wonderful experience.
But I want to come back now, just for a second, to something that you had said before related to public health and epidemiology, and I just want to read just a sentence or so from a paper that you delivered in 1977. And let me just quote this from the paper. It says, "For too many years, epidemiology of oral mucosal lesions has lived in the shadow of epidemiology of dental caries, periodontal diseases, and malocclusions, and therefore has not received proper attention in the planning of an oral health service."
Yeah, this is exactly what I mean today. And therefore, it has been very gratifying to participate here in this very close collaboration with the National Institute of Dental Research. Because there is now, in the National Institute of Dental Research, there is now a tremendous awareness of the oral mucosa. And I think that this is, again, something which will have great importance and influence on other countries that now, and I would like to mention one particular person who has been very instrumental in introducing this oral mucosal element, and this is Dr. Dushanka Kleinman, who did or was conducting this big study of 40,000 children, the oral mucosal lesions in 40,000 children. And this is the biggest study ever been done, and I feel very privileged that I was consulting and planning and calibrating the people in making the diagnosis. And now this big adult service, the Haynes study, will also concentrate very much on the oral mucosa.
Do you feel now that the epidemiology of oral mucosal problems is coming out from under that shadow?
Yes, I think that in the past the diseases of the oral mucosa has been more or less been dealt with by the dermatologist, by the ENT people, by specialists in internal medicine. But the increasing scientific background of dental education has now made it possible for the dental profession to be concerned with this. And I think that the last 30, 40 years, publications within the field made by dentists have shown that really the oral mucosa has been part and parcel of the work of the dental profession. So therefore, I think that we will see in the years to come, we will see a steadily growing interest for the oral mucosa. And I can only refer also to the literature and see the enormous literature on all precancerous lesions which has appeared. And I think that this is one of the areas where the dentist really, apart from the role that the dentist had in the HIV infection, that in detecting the early lesions, the early cancer lesion, or detecting the lesions before they become cancer. And this is where our research in recent years had brought us, I think, a great step forward. That now we are able to teach the dentist that by means of very simple clinical changes, we can gauge some of these lesions and predict this is a dangerous lesion. Here you should remove this lesion, or the lesion should be treated in another way. So therefore I think that the dentist here has a tremendous application. We say that 80% of all cancers of the mouth can be prevented. And this they can, of course, if you abstain from smoking, if you abstain from drinking more than 6 drinks a day, or so on and so forth. But of course there are other factors. But it is extremely important that the dental profession keep abreast with the development, that they read the journals, that they go to the continuing education courses. That is very, very important. And there's no doubt that in the years to come, we will see much more research within the precancer and also within the infectious diseases, not only the HIV, but also the lesions caused by human papillomavirus, by herpes simplex virus, and so on and so forth. So there's no doubt there's a great future for the dental investigators in the field of the oral mucosa.
While we're talking about lesions, tell me about the Pindborg tumor.
Yeah, that is an interesting thing, because that would not have been possible today. And I'll tell you why. Because in my old days, and that was in the early 50s when I founded oral pathology in Denmark, there was only one department of head and neck surgery, and that professor was a good friend of mine, and he understood that here was something which was in the beginning. So he gave me all the resected jaws he had. And he was a central department for the entire Denmark for the resection of the jaws. So our lab got all the jaws. So it meant that we had sometimes 20 odontogenic tumors a year. And then one day, going through the material, and I think it was way back in '55, I realized that there were 4 patients having some morphological features, the same type of morphological features which we didn't find in the garden variety of ameloblastomas. So I said, well, better look more closely at them. And then I said, well, this is not an ameloblastoma. This is a new, not hitherto recognized odontogenic tumor of epithelial origin. So I called this, with a very clumsy term, the calcifying epithelial odontogenic tumor. And of course I was very anxious to see what the reaction would be in the world, and the reaction was that then you could see in the years after that cases after case popped up. Because when people went back in the files, they could realize that they had registered under the wrong diagnosis of atypical ameloblastoma and so on. And then people felt it was a too clumsy term, so somebody suggested that they should use an eponym. I always say that I don't like to use eponym in designating diseases, with one exception, of course.
Of course, the Pindborg tumor is the one.
But it shows again that the tendency is for decentralization, and that's what I meant with it cannot be done today, because in my country now individual hospital dental departments, individual ENT departments, they take everything they can get their hands on and don't like to centralize in the big university hospital. Now we have virtually no odontogenic tumors to work with. So this is the way it goes. There are, I mean, side effects, bad side effects by making the decentralization in research.
I want to just change tacks just a little bit. We talked about, or you talked about how happy you were in the work that you're doing and how pleased you were. When you look back, are there any regrets, any things you would do differently?
No. There was a period where I was under very great press from different friends that I should, in the middle of my career, take an MD. And I resisted because I've always been proud of being a dentist, and I always maintained the concept that a dental education is a good background for further education, be it microbiology, surgery, pathology, and other aspects of dentistry. So that was one thing that I was considering, but I'm glad today that I did not do it. Of course, there are things that I regret. I perhaps at a few times have been too categoric in refusal of some papers and so on. But I mean, there's nothing really, it's very difficult to see many of one's errors in the past. I think that other people are better to look at what you have been doing or think. But of course, I have a rather hectic temper, and sometimes my temper has been too much and has been running off with me, and this I regret if I've hurt anybody over the years. But of course, the older you get, the more tolerant you become. But at least I have had the pleasure of having many good friends around the world. I always say that if you want enemies, there are 2 reasons in which you can get enemies. You can either become editor of a journal, or you can become member of the professorial committee to elect a professor. Then you are sure that you get enemies.
That's right, and you've got both.
But I have got both, but I hope I have more friends than enemies still.
When you talk about this traveling around the world, I saw the list of countries that you've spoken, and you mentioned 70. Is there any place that you haven't gone?
No. Well, yeah, I haven't been on the Philippines, by the way, and a few of the Latin American countries I haven't been either. But
there's lots of time.
Yeah, I've been in China, and China, I think, was really was a very important chapter in my life, because, and it also was again a series of events. I came to the FDI conference in Rio de Janeiro. I had a course in cancer, a 3-hour course, and when I came in to deliver the course, there were sitting 4 Chinese people in the front row. So I said, well, what are you doing here? Well, we have come from China to listen to you. So I said, that was funny. So they invited me for lunch, and it turned out that their life interest was all mucosal lesions. So they said, well, we have decided that we want to visit with you in Copenhagen. So they came to Copenhagen, and we had spent a week together, and they saw my department, and we discussed, and that was 1979. And I will never forget the evening we had them in our home, and my wife served them a dinner, and afterwards I have a rather big discotheque. So I said to these people, and they said they were very interested in music, so I said, what would you like to listen to? You just say, and I'll try to accommodate your wish. Yes, yes, they wanted to hear the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven. So I put on, and they were sitting here with 4 Chinese playing the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven. That was fantastic. So the follow-up of this visit was that the year after they invited my wife and myself to China for a 3-week tour, and I gave about 20 or 25 odd lectures in Chinese universities and established some very good contacts. And then I have been back 7 times giving courses, lectures, doing a few field studies as well. We have established a biomedical postgraduate training center in Beijing, paid for by Danish money, and where we have been giving many courses in pathology and microbiology. And then last year in May, there was a second World Conference on prevention of dental and oral diseases, and China was hosting this, and this was just in the height of the student revolution. So we went out, and I was down with Dr. RL489. We went down on Tiananmen Square. 3 times I was down there demonstrating with the students, and it was one of the great experiences of my life to see 500,000 people filling out the whole Tiananmen Square. Then RL489 and I left, and we left 2 days before they started shooting. So after that time, Denmark has cooled down the cultural exchange with China, because we feel that when you are demanding of students that they have to spend 4 or 5 years in a village doing agricultural work before you can be allowed to university, this is a violation of human rights. So we are cooling down, which I understand, but I also regret it, because it always will be to the harm of the innocent, because I love the Chinese, and they have a tremendous sense of humor. I mean, my standard jokes, which I use in Denmark, they also are being laughed of in China. So this is very nice. All your old standard jokes are being appreciated, and this is really something. So therefore, I hope that they will, that the conditions will become normal, and that we will have the same trend as we are watching now in Eastern Europe, that it must come to China as well.
How do your jokes go over in the United States?
Very well. I mean, the Americans have, of course, absolutely a sense of humor. Yeah, absolutely. But of course, there are countries, I don't want to mention, but there are countries in Southeast Asia where jokes are not appreciated. But I can tell you one of my jokes, because that we have in Denmark is very characteristic that the gay people, they have moustache, and then that's very characteristic in the ring, gold ring in the right ear. And then I always, when I show the pictures, and here you see a Dane, and he has a moustache, and he may belong to a risk group. And then if a year ago I was lecturing in Pakistan, in Karachi, for 400 dentists, and they were all men. And when I was going to say my joke about the moustache, I looked out and they all had moustache, so I had to keep mum. But I must say, I would like to say just one word about the HIV infection, because now I have seen several hundred people HIV infected, and I have been working with this problem since 1982, and I must say that I have learned to respect and to admire human heroism. When you are dealing with these people and they know they have a death penalty over their head, and the way they are accepting their fate is fantastic. So I really admire these people. It's really unbelievable sometimes the dignity with which they accept their fate. And we go out of our way in order to try to be kind and do something for these people. I think that we as dentists can do a lot to make life better for these people.
I'd like to just take a minute now and come back to something that you said at the very beginning of the interview, in which you talked about what sounded like an imminent retirement. What sort of things does the future hold for you? Where are you going with this?
Well, I have already made provisions that I have two departments that I administer in Copenhagen, and I will have to retire on September 1st in 1991, and I will been promised a writing desk in both departments, and I have a number of papers that I want to write. And I hope that as long as I can lecture, and I will continue, because lecturing is my life. I love to lecture, except for Danish dental students. They don't understand me, but everywhere in the world I love to lecture, especially for the postgraduate teaching, the graduate teaching, where you are coming to people who are eager to learn something. There I feel it's a very great privilege to teach. So I hope that I will continue to teach and edit a few more years, and then, well, I have many books I haven't read so far, and sometimes there are things you would like to read again.
Yes. What would you like to be remembered for?
My effort to try to expand dentistry into the non-dental sphere.
Thank you.